Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to Populist Podcast. I'm Chase,
I'm Charles.
and today we're joined by Green Party presidential candidate Howie Hawkins. Thanks for coming on today.
Thanks for having me.
All right, let me get us started. Do you want to go ahead and tell us who you are, where you come from, and why you're running for president specifically as a third-party candidate?
Sure. I'm a recently retired Teamster. I worked construction before I was a Teamster for the last almost 50 years, but that was to pay the bills. I've been an activist since the 1960s, active in the San Francisco Bay Area, coming up civil rights, anti-war, early ecology movement, and concluded at that time that we need an independent party on the left because the two major parties were serious about civil rights. They just escalated this war in Vietnam, and they didn't know the first thing about the environmental problems. So I supported independent third-party efforts until I was invited to the first National Green Party meeting to organize a Green Party in the United States in August 1984. And I've stayed active in the Green Party since then. The Green Party in New York's run me for governor 3 times. Each time we got enough votes to get a ballot line. And so a lot of Greens around the country asked me to run at the beginning of 2019. And so I said, okay, let's put these issues forward that need addressing that the two major parties are not. So that's a little bit about me and how I got into the campaign.
All right, so we're going to jump into some more policy-specific questions, and we're going to start with the last few weeks. They've been obviously rife with calls for equality as millions have taken to the streets and to social media to fight against police brutality and systemic racism. This crisis has left many looking to their leaders for answers. What would you do as president to not only curb unjust police violence, but also to mitigate the systematic practices that are preventing true equity?
Well, we're dealing with police brutality and a pandemic of racism that's been going on for 400 years that recent events have unveiled for everybody who cares to look. So at the police department level, which is local, the president and the Department of Justice can't dictate things, but they can create incentives. So what I've called for is the Department of Justice should provide guidelines and resources to communities to get community control of the police. And there's a lot of talk about defunding, which is good. You don't send the police for a homeless person and charge them with vagrancy. We should be sending other people to find them a home. And if somebody's got a drug abuse problem or they're having a mental health breakdown, you don't send the police, you send people that can deal with the medical issues there. So defunding is important, but as long as we allow the police to police themselves, they're going to do what they have been doing since their roots in Indian removal and runaway slave patrols. And that is to keep downscale people down and out of the upscale areas. And so that's how we get a repressive policing system with community control. And I'm talking about elected police commissions that have the power to hire and fire the police chief, to independently investigate and discipline officers for misconduct, and to negotiate police union contracts and remove those special shielding provisions that prevent us from holding them accountable. That's what we need at the local level, where it's basically a change in who has the power to govern what the police do. That's key. So, and then even if we, do the defunding and shift resources to social services that can answer some of these social problems better than the police, there's still not enough money in the police budgets. So the federal government's got to step up. We need a Marshall Plan for the cities, an economic bill of rights, so everybody has the right to a living wage job, an income above poverty, affordable housing, comprehensive health care, lifelong public education, and a secure retirement. So we have a floor and in terms of a basic standard of living for everybody. And those are the kind of resources that we're just not going to get by shifting resources in police departments. That's where the federal government can step up and make things right for these communities that have been discriminated against and oppressed for generations.
All right. So one thing you mentioned there was drug abuse, and this has been a prevalent issue recently with the war on drugs. What would you do to address this crisis?
Decriminalize all the drugs like they've done in Portugal since 2001. So if you're in possession of an illicit drug, you're not put through the criminal system, you're given a ticket. It's a violation. What they do in Portugal is you go to a hearing with a doctor, a lawyer, and a social worker, and they look at your situation from the perspective of your health, not looking at you as a criminal. And if you need drug treatment, they provide that. If you're using drugs to cope with some other problem, they try to deal with that problem. And since they've done that, deaths from overdoses have practically zeroed out. Crimes around, street crimes around drug distribution has gone way down. And in fact, because people get help, the number of people using hard drugs has declined in Portugal. So I think that's what we need to do here. We have a terrible opioid epidemic and tens of thousands of people dying from that. People don't go to get help because they're afraid they're going to, get in a criminal problem because they're using heroin or whatever it is. Those people need to feel they can go and get medical treatment and help with their addiction. So decriminalizing drugs. Now, in the case of marijuana, I would just legalize it and have it taxed and regulated. It's less harmful than alcohol and tobacco, and there's no reason it should be an illicit drug.
All right. So, in the midst of a worldwide pandemic, healthcare is obviously an issue front and center in many voters' minds. This is one of the places where you differ from the mainstream progressives in the Democratic Party. In your healthcare proposal, you call for a transition from our current private health insurance based system to a single payer Medicare for all system, then finally, a national health service that's publicly owned and democratically controlled. Two questions. First, how long a period do you see this transition taking place over? And second, why do you think a national health service is the superior approach to healthcare?
Well, we have a 10-year program, and it goes in steps because you have to do the planning to not only socialize the payment, that's what a single public payer does, but to socialize the delivery, including the pharmaceutical companies. So that's why it takes 10 years. You need to plan and then you need to acquire. So what we're looking at is a system where hospitals and clinics and the drug companies are publicly owned. And healthcare workers, doctors, nurses, and so forth are salaried public employees. And the whole system is governed by locally elected health boards that federate at the state and national level for overall coordination and planning. And that's superior then to just a national health insurance system, which is what the Medicare for All proposals in Congress are about, because you replace fees for service by delivery institutions that are trying to maximize their income. So what they tend to do is rush people through to get more fees, give them tests and maybe treatments they don't really need to maximize their income. If you're paying doctors and other health providers a salary, then their focus is on proper care. And they can take the time to give the proper care without being pressured by the institutions they work for to add a lot of fees. So that's a better cost control. And then the democratic aspect is crucial. I mean, if you have a single public payer and it's a centralized bureaucracy, I mean, I'm fussing with Medicare, which I'm on, because I think they've overbilled me and I've paid them and they're saying I haven't. And it's hard as hell to get anybody that can show me the payment record and get that straightened out. With democratic control, the people you elect a board and they have to answer to you. And you can make sure healthcare resources are distributed equitably across the whole region of the district. I'm in a neighborhood right now with no clinics, no doctors. It's a 2-mile walk to the community health center, which is where the Medicaid patients go, and up the hill to the university where the hospitals are. Half the people in this neighborhood don't have cars. And so if we had a elected health district, people in this community could speak up to say that we need some health care resources here. And we'd avoid irrationalities like the hospitals up on the hill are competing for customers. So they're advertising, their fancy equipment like MRIs. We got too many MRIs in this area and not enough clinics in the neighborhoods. That's what democratic control can get you. And I think it'll be much more superior because it'll be accountable to the consumers, the people that are using the healthcare.
All right, so obviously the Green Party was founded with the mission of preserving our planet in mind. And staying true to this mission, you've advocated for what you're calling the eco-socialist Green New Deal. Can you give us a synopsis of what this would look like?
Sure. We're talking about uh, to transform the economy so all sectors, not just energy production, but manufacturing, agriculture, buildings, and transportation, are operating zero to negative greenhouse gas emissions and 100% clean energy in a decade, because that's what the climate science and the carbon budgets it's produced for the globe say a rich country like the United States needs to do to avoid the worst impact of climate change. So, what we're talking about is running a lot of this through the public sector, public energy system, a public transportation system, and a public sector in manufacturing so we can produce the new machinery we need to produce things like steel with electric arc furnaces instead of coke ovens, or cement that doesn't require calcium carbonate, which when it heats up, the calcium hardens the cement, but the uh, carbonate evaporates into the atmosphere. Cement accounts for 5% of the world's carbon footprint. So we need to transform all these technologies. And we're not going to do it with, a carbon tax and some regulations and mandates here and there. We got to plan it through the public sector. So that's why we call it an eco-socialist Green New Deal. The analogy is during World War II, the federal government in that emergency took over or built a quarter of the manufacturing capacity of the United States in order to turn industry on a dime into what they called the arsenal of democracy, to arm the Allies to defeat the Nazis and the Axis powers. We need to do nothing less through the public sector to defeat climate change. So that, in a nutshell, is what we're talking about, and it's a 27.5 trillion 10-year dollar program to make this transformation, which I would say, was put forward with the idea of dealing with the climate meltdown. But now, given this coronavirus depression, we need it for economic recovery because the two major parties are counting dogmatically on private enterprise alone to pull us out of this recession. But with consumers short of money and holding on to just pay for essentials and investors saying it's too risky to invest in great jobs, we got the recipe for a depression. We got to bring the economy out of that with a lot of public investment. So the Green New Deal serves that purpose too.
With a history of countless interventions being done to topple leftist or left leaning governments across the world, how do you think the US should approach foreign policy in the future?
Well, we should be the world's humanitarian superpower instead of its global military empire, which props up repressive governments, keep labor cheap, let our US based multinationals get access to markets and resources. It's imperialism. And we got to do a 180-degree turn. I'm calling for a 75% cut in military spending, bringing our troops home from the 7 shooting wars we're involved, from the over 800 military bases we have overseas. Also, pledging no first use of nuclear weapons and disarming to a minimum credible deterrent, and going to the other nuclear powers and saying it's time for complete and mutual nuclear disarmament according to the terms of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which 122 nations agreed to the text of 3 years ago. And those countries would be with us once we reduce tensions by the initiatives I'm talking about and go to the nuclear powers and say, okay, it's time to disarm. And we're, as you probably know, the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist has moved their doomsday clock the closest they've ever had it to midnight because we're in a new nuclear arms race. The last bilateral treaty between the United States and Russia concerning strategic arms expires next February 5th. There are no negotiations going on. And none of the major party candidates have ever talked about this. And it's a life or death issue. So one of the goals of our campaign is to make it a top campaign issue and get a debate going and maybe some movement toward disarmament.
Well, that's all the questions we have for you. Would you like to take a moment to address the audience directly?
Well, we have a miserable choice between Donald Trump, who in this coronavirus crisis has shown himself to be totally incompetent. And once he blew that, now he's indifferent. And tens of thousands of people are dying. It's hundreds of thousands, over 100,000 now. The projections now will be to the second 100,000 by sometime in September. And then Joe Biden has been invisible. He's got the platform. Where is he? And he does pop up every once in a while, but he hasn't pointed a direction. I mean, the coronavirus crisis, we should be doing what like all the Pacific Rim countries did: test, trace, quarantine the infected, and suppress the infections and the deaths. And we can't even do that. So the two governing parties are presiding over a failed state in this country. You can see it in the declining living life expectancies of the working class. You can see it in this runaway arms race. You can see it in the failure to address the climate crisis. And you can see it in the failure to address the coronavirus crisis. So this is an opportunity for the Green Party to step into that political vacuum. And I know some people say, well, I want to vote Trump out. Well, I would say if you're for Medicare for all, if you're for a full strength Green New Deal, if you're for college for all and medical and student debt relief and progressive programs like that, if you vote for Biden, you're voting against those programs. And you get lost in the sauce. They don't know if you're a Sanders socialist or a progressive of some kind, or you support Biden's center right policies. You disappear. We need to speak and act for ourselves and use that vote. Don't waste your vote on the lesser evil. Vote for what you want and make the politicians come to you. So your vote is powerful, and don't just give it away to something you don't really support. I hope you'll vote for the Green Party because everybody knows what our vote stands for. We're clear on our platform, and they're the kinds of things that on a lot of these issues have majoritarian support.
All right. That's all we have for you guys today. If you'd like to support Howie's campaign, his website, as well as all his social media links will be down in the description. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.